We're together.
Hi, and welcome to Rose Yoga, tapping into heart courage. And I'm having another conversation with mindfulness practitioner Jeff Granville. And today we're going to talk about the wounds of feeling unseen and feeling unheard and how that impacts us in our life. And even if this is originally from childhood experiences and memories, how this really shapes who we are, how we try to overcompensate in life. Um, and I'm really feeling like it's a signature of the times of even on social media, like not being able to reach and have your voice heard, your message heard, or in circles with people, like people wanting to resonate with each other, but then speaking over each other and like noticing our own patterns for like whether we're withholding or we need to be heard or what happens when we get cut off or ignored. It's a big topic, especially, when we are like still growing into our true selves, even for those of us who've been healing our whole life, like we always get to circle back to more refinement. I know that I have been dealing with the impact of narcissistic abuse, which is really just, people having a style of just monologuing towards you. It's never a conversation. That person criticizing everything about you. So you're really not ever safe, always walking on eggshells. Um, and it also creates, next to feeling unloved, disrespected, and unworthy, it does create a total lack of identity because, and I'm speaking for myself here, if no one's ever having a conversation or going, how are you? Or how do you feel about this? You're only ever being told what you are or like shown what you are in the form of criticism, usually, even if that person's unconscious of it. But if this is happening to you since you were a child, and then fast forward, look at the partners you choose, look at the people you fall in love with, look at the people that are your bosses, maybe, and like noticing the patterns of where you fall into. Are you ever getting empowered, or where do you feel more free? Where do you not feel seen and heard? All of that. And I feel like, we often cast people back into those roles so that we get to see, I don't think this shoe fits anymore. This is really uncomfortable, so I'm gonna have to choose something. Um, so circling back to what is the collective going through, and I feel like in the past year, I've really noticed, especially with the climate towards our government or, political, that everyone can agree, whether, doesn't matter what side they're on, that they do feel out of control, not heard, disempowered. So I feel like we're all getting the opportunity to face toxic relationship and the effects of that kind of abuse, of never actually having a voice, never feeling like you matter. And, some say that neglect and abandonment often leaves bigger scars than actual abuse because someone's actually interacting with you. But when you are constantly ignored, you actually more easily create an identity where you don't actually know who you are because you're constantly waiting for that feedback or to be told. So I invited Jeff today to talk about the signatures of this and the nature of not feeling seen. I'm going to welcome Jeff. I'm going to pass the microphone to you.
Hello, Veruschka. Hello, everybody. And thanks for having me on. It's a great, great topic. And you brought up so many talking points. I don't even know where to begin, but I love getting geeky on how we're built. okay, and how it plays out. And I'm going to go there. But first of all, I want to say that on a very basic level, every living system, even bacteria, even electrons, have a growth or protection mode. They either, like Bruce Lipton says about the baby snail born without parents around, and it has 1 meter on the dash that says good vibes or bad vibes, right? And if it goes towards something it can eat, it feels good vibes and it eats and it grows and it's fine. But every living system and even every cell of our body has a growth or protection state. So if you're in a situation where you're not being seen, then you're not going to resonate. We have this heart, this amazing heart with a toroidal field that reaches out in our environment. And when you're with somebody that's open to you, that you resonate together. And if one person's closed off or being judgmental or hurtful, then you're in a protective mode, okay? And you don't feel felt. So one of the big keys to this is that we do create aspects of ourselves to deal with any living situation. If it's trauma, then we build an aspect of ourselves to deal with that trauma at the time and protect the aspect of ourselves, our original aspect. We become the aspect we need to. And even if you look at Jim Carrey for an example, he says he became a comedian to get his mother's attention. He just created these alternative aspects of himself to make his mother happy, get her attention, allow her to a little relief from what she was going through. So, and he's dealt with it because he's been such an outward persona. People think that's him, but it's not really him. His authentic self is never really seen. So feeling felt, feeling that resonant frequency with another heart is so important. And it's often said, I've said it many times, that feeling felt is the first step in any healing journey, any way to close that gap between the aspects you've created. So if you're not seen, you're not going to be heard, and you're surely not going to be felt, right? So we have, now I'm going to get a little geeky on you. We're built to resonate. We're built to mirror other people's actions. We have, like Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, talks about the ventral medial prefrontal cortex was a little tiny place of the prefrontal cortex right between the eyes that the name of the book is Blink. What do you know within a blink of an eye? Thousands of tells on someone's face tells you whether or not you can trust them, whether they understand you, and we mirror their actions and feel it in our body. So if you're not being seen, the person who you feel unseen by is going to give thousands of subconscious tells that affect your physiology and affect how you create an aspect to deal with that person. So you can't be your authentic self. So how are you seen in that environment? You're not seen, you're not heard, and you're not felt. And that creates isolation because then it's not a resonant total. Like when we get together and have a good time, it's like your radiance and my radiance makes a brighter radiance, right? We harmonize. It's a constructive frequency we build. But if you don't pick up these cues in a blink of an eye, your physiology is going to change to a point of protection. And that changes everything. It changes the way you show up in the world, the way you live your life, the decisions you make subconsciously. It affects everything. So not being seen is a huge, huge issue because it is, like you said, it can be a boss, it can be a friend, it can be a spouse, it can be your care provider when you were young, your mother. In the very beginning, we're set up to be that way because it affects every aspect of our lives. So it's a huge topic. I love it.
Is there anything personal you're willing to share, like something that you're still working on from your childhood, for example, and some maybe
Oh,
practical applications of how,
yeah.
whether it's self-talk or other modalities? I'd love to welcome that in.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, always willing to share a personal story. And it really, when you hear something from somebody, you might believe it, but when you've experienced it, you know it. Knowing is a bodily sensation. You know it by heart. That's the term I love, is when you really have experienced something, then you know it by heart. Your heart remembers it, right? And so I was not seen. I couldn't speak. I was belittled by my dad. I was put in a situation where it bothered me so much I couldn't stand up in third grade and read out loud because I would just shake and my voice would crack and I was just, humiliated. So I wasn't seen. I was relatively smart. I knew how to read. My real self just couldn't show up because of this trigger. And it affected me throughout my life. I got counseling, met a really great counselor that helped me through it when I was getting help for some of my kids and our relationship. But having the childhood, that insecure attachment with my dad, because not just mothers or caregivers, it's everybody in the environment, right? Dads play an important role in the affect they have on their children, whether they know it or not. And as hard as mine was, I said, no experience is worthless. It can always serve as a good negative example. And that has carried forward in my life. But it's only with awareness and understanding of it that you can make the adjustments you need to change it from one generation to another. Because having not been seen and not being able to express myself when I was young carried over to me, like you said, recreating that in relationships because that's the familiar. That aspect of me that had to manage my situation from trauma became the one who was familiar with that way of survival. And you're creating your world from that triggered place of protection. So we often don't create successful relationships in that frame. But as you know, we've talked about that all relationships are successful because if you're willing to learn from them, there's always takeaways. Not everything's supposed to be forever, except for the curiosity and the lessons.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's many things I'm thinking of. How do you feel like it's impacted you as a father? Like, I'm curious, like, from what you experienced and then becoming a father, like, were you trying to, do things differently, I assume, that your children wouldn't receive that? And in what ways have you found yourself mimicking things unconsciously? I'm kind of curious in that forward motion of learning from your own wounds.
hmm Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll go there with you. It definitely plays out I've got 8 kids, and they're all amazingly bright and deep and challenging, wonderfully challenging. And it, my early parenting, I was in a job where I was the manager of a boatyard, and everybody came to me with their problems. And I got into this situation of like, okay, these parts aren't here, go get them from this guy. I was solving people's problems all day long. And if I brought that was an aspect of myself I created for the job, to do the job. So when I came home, and I remained in that aspect, and my wife or my kids would come to me with a problem. I'd just say, well, just do this and do that and do that. Well, they don't want to be told what to do. They could figure out something. They want to be heard and felt and seen. Okay. So even though I didn't do it for the same reasons as my father, that's the way it manifested out of me even when I was a completely different parent than my dad, and I coached all their sports, and I was very active and a great father.
Well, I
Enjoyed it
have
very
to
much.
just add to that, though, that that is a very common reputation of the male figure that in relationship, it's like it's the male's job to fix, to find a solution when the feminine just wants to be heard, or, So what you're describing kind of exactly fits what the narrative is already. It's like there's really no harm to be wanting to help by fixing the situation, but until we learn better, right? Or learn what is the actual need, right? But anyway,
Right.
just wanted to add
No.
that's like it's interesting and funny that that was your job description, but yet that is allegedly also the stereotypical complaint.
Yeah, yeah. And the reason it's important then is because male female interaction is kind of wired for that. We're built for that. You're built for that. I mean, we're talking stereotypic generalities, right? We know there's spectrums in all directions, but in the male female masculine feminine situation, that is stereotypical. And that's why I think it's an important share, is because I went and learned early in my parenting years that that is what I was doing. I went to someone who made me aware of that, and I wasn't aware that was part of the problem. Their reaction to not being seen or felt or heard and just being told what they should do, even though I did it nicely, I wasn't being bossy or anything, but I was just solving problems, right? Fixing things. And but their actions towards me, I didn't understand. I didn't understand why I was getting the reaction that I was. I'm putting my best self forward and I'm feeling misunderstood. That's not being seen by me, or me being seen as well. So, learning to take that moment, and I used to live on Guimas Island, and there was a 7-minute ferry ride, and I'd have to wait in line, and I would use that time to get ready for that aspect to be at work. And then on the way home, I'd wait and I would take away, detach, downregulate that aspect of myself that was the problem solver. And then I also learned that when you ask people, well, what would you do? Helps them think of their way to develop their own way of solving problems. So then I started sharing that at work. And then you've got people who are more independent thinking, not just coming to you to solve things, but also thinking on their own and developing their own problem solving skills. So, yes, it's a typical male female paradigm and scenario, and father with children is the same. It's very common for fathers to take that role. Kids feeling talked down to, even when the dad's no intention of that. I love you, I care about you, but I have a strong male voice, and it, I'm sure that played into my dad's scenario with me, so. Yeah, I think it's a real important thing to become aware of, and that, we can all feel a little less personalized about it because it does happen to everybody. It's a common scenario, but it still happens today, and it's still part of what we're talking about is being unseen. So it's usually, I think in general, when women to get together, they feel heard, they feel felt, they feel seen. It's that male female dynamic and the male to the children, both male and female, that puts us in that position of not being seen and felt. But it does happen, of course, with mothers as primary caregivers, not in tune to their child and not there for them, not seeing their child as well.
Yeah, and then as we know, it is from sort of what I call an arrested development, of not having have maybe involuntarily, coming into parenthood too soon, not having worked on their own issues and how our children, do trigger us or test us. And I'm sure they have been some of your greatest challenges too, for personal growth.
Hmm.
Um, so are there some things you can share about steps to take to improve, even just for oneself, that feeling seen. I mean, for myself, I know that just self-compassion, empathy, when you know you're not going to get it from that person you don't feel seen by, is an important first step.
Right, right. Well, one of the things that's really important is that we're we're feeling beings who think, not thinking beings who feel. So language was developed to express emotion, to tell people how we're feeling. So being heard is the key to being seen. It's we see people first and then hear them, but it's not the visual that makes you feel unseen. I mean, unless they're just ignoring you and looking away. But if people don't hear you, if they don't understand you, if you can't convey your emotion, then you're not going to feel seen, heard, or felt. So there's an important part about being a mindful listener. You're not just really being present in the moment is the first thing you need to be. You're listening for the message of what's being told to you. And then you're listening for the reason why. Why is someone trying to communicate to me? And like I said, it's usually about how they feel. So if they're not feeling heard and felt, they won't be feeling seen, right? So mindful listening is first, we're going to be aware that people are trying to convey emotion to us, how they feel about something, if they want to eat, if they don't want to eat, or if they're hurt, or, it's all about how we feel. So if we're looking for the motivation why, not just that I'm here and present and what's the content of being said, but why, what's the motivation behind it? Because that's emotion motivates us. It's energy and motion, right? So it's wanting to convey, having the desire to convey is like dopamine. Taking action to convey it is adrenaline. Feeling felt is oxytocin. And then cortisol is reparative, calming. But if we're have a desire to be seen, heard, and felt, and it gives us dopamine for movement, adrenaline for movement, it converts into adrenaline, and we don't feel heard, we don't get the oxytocin of the high five we get at resonance, then the cortisol is damaging. It creates chaos in the body. So the dopamine loop goes in full with a healthy spiral when you feel felt, and it gets interrupted. The dopamine loop gets interrupted because you don't feel resonant and connected. You don't get the oxytocin, and it always methylates into cortisol, and cortisol is either going to be calming or chaotic. So the dopamine loop is two-sided. So it triggers it all. So anyway, being in the moment, truly listening, and what's the motivation? Getting that it's emotion is the motivation.
Which is true. Um, which kind of brings me back to when we have those wounds and we're put in those positions, and then we might, speaking from personal experience, not that too long ago, when we're exposed to that pattern again that we experienced in childhood, it's like not only going into flight or flight, but one that is not as obvious as the freeze, just like the deer in the headlight. And here you're talking about the chemical reactions, but when we are in freeze mode, being exposed to repeated abuse, which maybe some call toxic abuse, it's kind of so disorienting to us that have experienced that um, regularly or maybe heavily in the past and create a life that doesn't exist. How do you even identify that you're a freezing up and don't even know how to respond? and even being able to identify what's going on, right? And
Hmm.
then to also become more resourceful again, So this is like the impact of narcissistic relationship or abuse does create certain type of traits and beliefs in your persona, in your character, and can drain you completely of life force and energy. And that's where people, can call their ex-partners or, the abusive party vampiric, right? Because what our energy vampires really, they are consciously or unconsciously sabotaging your energy if you're easily a victim, or if those shoes fit for you, and then you're again cast right in that role that feels familiar, but it's also at the same time disorienting.
Hmm.
So how do you relate to or any pro tips on the freezing aspect?
That's such a good point. I really appreciate that because the fight or flight mode, the sympathetic nervous system, has two distinct reactions: a high energy reaction, which is the fight, flight, run, go, or a low energy reaction, which is the dorsal dive, the freeze, the fetus position, the body armoring, the protection, lay down in front of a bear in the fetal position so you don't get eaten, right? So when there's an attack on you, big T trauma means it's too much too soon. Small T trauma is too little for too long, all the good things you didn't get. So in a big T trauma, too much too soon, it's like a bear attack, and you're either going to run, fight, or get in the fetal position for survival. Okay. Well, if you are chronically triggered, not being seen, and you get it over and over and over again, then they've found that the dorsal dive in a chronic situation of low energy response, you create an aspect of yourself of very low energy. It's actually the beginning of hibernation. Your metabolism changes, everything slows down, and it is the same pathway that leads to hibernation. And that leads to depression. It's because you're depressing your energy to get away and survive and fight. Your energy of expression and emotion is all suppressed and slowed down. And then, so when you're triggered into the fight or flight mode and you go into the dorsal dive, the freeze position, and it happens over and over again, that's what leads to depression and the slowing down. I just don't have the energy. I can't get up and move and go change and do anything. That's because it's been chronically imprinted in you. And that is your new aspect. And the aspect you create in that situation has a worldview of the world's going to harm me and I need to lay low and I need to be quiet and this is how I'm going to survive. So whenever you're chronically triggered, that's the aspect that shows up. And it actually has a different epigenetic expression being in that triggered mode. So we get lethargic and gain weight and our metabolism changes and everything. That's a different you. That's a different version of you that shows up in the freeze mode. Just like in the fight or flight mode, if you were the protector aspect of your young sibling and you had to show up and get angry and yell and stand your ground to your parent to protect, you have a protector mode that gets triggered into action. So this is the opposite of that, right? And that aggressive one would be adrenaline, and I'm going to go with a lot of dopamine and take action. And that's the aspect in the worldview is I have to be hyper vigilant and protect my little sibling, right? That's who you just in an instant of fear will trigger that into full mode. That's who I am now. So if you're triggered all the time, that becomes your new default mode network. So that's who you are. It's implicit. instead of an explicit reaction that happened once or twice, it all becomes implicit on who you are and who you have to be in the world. So that's a very important point with the freeze question.
Yeah, so we're going to be throwing out a little 10-day offering on this topic called Phoenix from the Flame because I feel like you painted such a great picture. And wow, I had no idea about the hibernation, which is pretty shocking to see how dramatic that is on the nervous system. And that's why modalities like you and I share are specifically targeted to work with the body, the memories of the body, and really rewiring them. Because when we're triggered, that's why these things still feel so real and come up because they are still stored in the body. And so, yeah, this topic about unseen is so much bigger than we can conceive, like you're mentioning feeling unheard and not being felt, right? And I think as human beings, what do we want? We want to feel understood, be understood, and belong and feel useful. Like that is relationship, that is building connection. So if we don't have connection or feel like we are even safe or enough with the people that are our main characters in our life, whether that is a parent or a partner, or now maybe the long list of exes that all were the same make and model, that's like, hello, it's time maybe for you to upgrade and have increase your self-confidence, your knowing of your worth, and that you do matter in the world. If we keep only looking to that same cast of characters for approval, we might as well go into permanent hibernation, right?
Yeah, yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
Yeah.
And you bring up a good point because I had mentioned before when we were talking about this that I often say the bane of my existence, the thing I like least, is being misunderstood. When I'm putting my best foot forward with my best idea, my heartfelt response, and it's not understood, I don't feel heard, and I don't feel seen. Like I'm even accused of coming at you from a aggressive angle, and it's, oh, whoa, no, I didn't mean that. That is a hard thing to deal with. And if you're in a relationship or a situation where that happens chronically over and over again, then it can make you feel like giving up trying. Why should I keep trying? And that's where hopelessness sets in. And you know where hopelessness goes, right? So this is an opportunity with what I call the trinity of transcendence is awareness, understanding, and adjustment. And that's why I like to get geeky about how we're made, because if we have an awareness of the mechanism that stores the trauma, then we can have an understanding of the adjustments we need to make to unwind it, to get out of it, to release the triggers that keep us triggered in that aspect. So, one of the main things about, how they say it's good to have an open mind, to be curious, to be open to new things, right? So, the cure, the antidote to that hopelessness is to have an aha moment of, wait a minute, there might be something else, a spark of hope, right? So if anything you've heard during this leads you to go, that might be true for me, then, come join us and reach out to us individually or together, and we can help you through it.
Yeah. And what I was just having to relate to what you were sharing, just about dealing with the challenging people when that we're trying to be connecting to with, that we get these feeling misunderstood by, unseen by, never enough. That it seems like if that person is always going into defense, making assumptions about you, being offended by anything you're saying, even though you haven't even said anything. Like the distortions, it just gets so exhaustive. So those are some traits that if you're struggling with someone, take note because it honestly is textbook, these reactions. And so you are completely not being seen if the person's choosing to be offended, being defensive, attacking you, being aggressive, and just creating hostile communication. And you walk around away going, I don't even know what just happened. I didn't even say anything. I didn't even get a chance to say anything. Um, what's helped me with those things is the four agreements. I'm sure we've touched on this before, and what you're saying, like just having curiosity. If that other person just chose to be like, wait, when you said that, what did you mean by that? They could even be offended, but they're at least asking a follow-up question rather than becoming instantly offended or whatever. But I'm
Yeah.
just trying to share about practical applications because it's taken me so long to pull it all apart, identify it, and really the only way to stop these patterns that are being modeled to us by our family or by our society, by these conditions, is to stop the cycle and pause, don't take it personally, and go like, whoa, wait a minute. Can you repeat what you just said? Or what did you mean when you said blah, blah, blah? Because then they're going to have to backpedal and actually say, whatever. But it's really about clarifying. And I feel like those are the first steps. And if someone can't speak with you reasonably and respectfully, it's time to edit them out if they can't treat you with the same respect that you find that you do actually need. And that's
Mm.
where self-respect is the self-healer. And that's pretty much what this container is dedicated to, is for us to really regain our self-respect. And that does have to do with being able to stop, make boundaries, to actually know what you feel rather than giving your power away to the other person that made you feel identityless in the first place. So it's like what we're talking about here is taking the time to stop, pause, take inventory, and not rely on our validation to the outside. It really is an inside job. And so I just want to ask to you again, like, what are some practical steps to take when you are feeling triggered and unseen, disrespected? What are some things that have helped you?
Really, really good setup and question. I love it. Um, well, what you're talking about, and we haven't said the N word yet, narcissist, but when somebody is chronically not seeing you or hearing you or feeling you, they might be a little self-absorbed. They might be more focused on their own self than they are on you, right? So that's the somewhere on the spectrum of narcissism. And if you look at like borderline or full-on narcissism, that's from an insecure attachment with their care provider. Okay. And one of the things, this is a big takeaway from a Huberman lab that I was watching, is that when you are a very insecure attachment with your care provider and you become a narcissist, you become a cynic. And it's an imprint, an epigenetic imprint for life. Okay. If it wasn't as severe, you might be a skeptic. A skeptic is like, okay, I'm going to trust you, but I'm going to watch you, right? Or there might be something more than what I know. But a cynic, which is then branded for life, always believes that other people have an ulterior motive. They can't believe what's true coming out of you. So how could you ever feel heard or felt or seen? when they are setting up the scenario to have the confusion, to reinforce their worldview that everybody is untrustable, that I have to be hyper vigilant with everybody, because that's a cynic. A cynic is irreversible. We can learn how to live with it. And they say the best possible way is like what you're saying, being mindfully aware. They have the only success they've had is taking a narcissist who's a cynic and saying, okay, this is what's happening and why. No wonder you turned out that way with the attachment, insecure attachment you had. So if they can understand it in a comfortable setting, and then you invite them, okay, instead of being a cynic, be a skeptic. Go ahead and be on guard, but just be open that there might be something else. And that's what you touched on. You touched on ask them, is this what you meant? Is that what you said? Right? I I don't feel heard, I don't feel understood. So can I get clarity when somebody speaks something of you or speaks upon you in a way that is not correct to you, to your authenticity, you're going to feel unseen, unheard, unrespected, right? And it turns out the number one way to disarm a narcissist is to ask for clarity, just like you said. Because if you just react to what they said, if you don't take that power of the pause, is to pause and respond instead of immediately react, because we always react from the triggered program, the triggered aspect. We react from there in fight or flight. But if we can just take a breath, take a little gap between the stimulus and the response, that's where the power comes in. And if you take that moment to say, did you really tell me that I'm worthless from a narcissist? Did you just tell me that I'm worthless? They'll be disarmed and it'll change the narrative. And that is a very powerful way. Now, if you're in a situation that's abusive and you try something like this and it makes it worse, you really need some help. Reach out. We can help. But that is a very disarming to question for clarity of something that was said to you when you don't feel felt is the number one way to disarm the situation and get clarity instead of reacting and making it worse.
And also, if that moment reveals a bigger truth to yourself by actually, we always have the evidence already, but then when we literally have the proof of that setup, it's sort of that's then on us to become our better parents and decide, do these energy vampires even deserve our life force and our presence, So it is, once we find the courage to take these steps, to react differently, to ask questions, then it's also on us to edit the quality of our life, right? So yeah, welcoming you to join us for a super duper economical deal of tapping for 10 days in a row for $22. We start May 22nd. Look below in the comments. Jeff and I will both be sharing different methods and practical applications. So yeah, really designed to step out of these old identities of feeling unsafe, not good enough, unworthy, unlovable, and rewriting the script a little bit so that we can stand more in our power, reclaim our life force, and be a model of connection. Just learning new tools is going to impact everyone in your personal sphere, trust me. So any closing words, Jeff?
No, I love it. I just, that I believe that self-awareness leads to self-regulation, which builds resilience. So, like you're saying, if you are self-aware, you have an opportunity to self-regulate, and then you have a chance for resilience because you're either going to find a way through the relationship or find a way out of the relationship, right? And that's the editing, that's the filtering. And when you have an understanding, once you're aware of it and you have an understanding of what's happening, why you're feeling triggered and feeling unseen, then it becomes upon you to make the right adjustment to have the life that you want.
Oh, and that's really bringing it back. I've been feeling like I'm getting the re words a lot in this last month. And all that to say is that we would like you to feel more resourced. And that's
Mm.
kind of a cool name because it's like, or word like source, if whatever that means to you, great spirit, endless life energy to like the people that drain us the most, that make us feel like life isn't even worth living, or can we even ever meet up to their expectation? You know, that whole not good enoughness, like to be resourced, to know, like, no, I have enough energy to lead my life in a new way, a different way, change my mindset, reclaim my energy. So, that's really my inspiration with this offering is for all of us to feel more resourced. So,
Ooh, I love that resource. That's a good one. And I'm going to add to that. We're going to be, then you get remembered. You bring those aspects of yourself back together and you remember who you truly are. You put it back together.
because I mean, honestly, if you are dealing with this wound that we're talking about, and I feel like it is an epidemic, um, oh gosh, I just lost the thread. Okay, remembered. That's good. Oh, soul retrieval. It really is these lost parts of our soul that we never got to actually seed and root down because of that freeze and unsafety where it us with these wounds, it's like it's so important to get grounded because it's so unfamiliar. And so this is really a body of work that does with the remembering includes literal soul retrieval. And that's what I love about the tapping modality is because we really can just call it all back in so that we can repair our cellular memory. So yeah, let's go. Let's go team. All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. And thanks for being vulnerable. And I learned a lot from you today. So,
Oh, thank you for providing the safe and supportive environment to be expansive.
all right, y'all, get on the train, join us, check it out below. See you later.